Good evening and welcome to In Focus. Tonight, two theaters, one shared question. What does security really mean in practice? And who pays the price when states try to lock it in? In Europe, Ukraine's allies are sketching what a post-ceasefire order might look like, with British and French plans for military hubs inside Ukraine and a US-backed monitoring system designed to make any truce enforceable and durable, not just a pause before the next strike. And in Gaza, a winter deepens a humanitarian emergency. Egypt's Red Crescent says that it has dispatched its 111th aid convoy carrying food, medicine, fuel and shelter supplies. But the relief effort is unfolding against wider pressures: displacement in the West Bank, restrictions on independent reporting from Gaza, and an Israeli push to expand settlements and tighten state authority under the banner of law and order. These are stories about deterrence and governance, about access and accountability, and about the fine line between stabilizing a crisis and entrenching it. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi, and this is In Focus, where we cut through the noise and stay with what really shifts the story. Ukraine's allies say that they are backed by U.S. support and a monitoring mechanism led by Washington. At a summit in Paris, Britain and France signaled readiness to deploy forces after a ceasefire, with plans for military hubs across Ukraine designed to reassure and deter, while staying far from front lines and not engaging Russian troops directly. Reuters also reports that the United States is backing a package of security guarantees and would lead a proposed ceasefire monitoring and verification system using tools like drones, sensors and satellites, with a mechanism to address breaches and recommend remedies. Supporters argue that the goal is to make any truce enforceable and durable by combining European presence on the ground with long-term military support for Ukraine and clear consequences if Russia attacks again. For further analysis, we're joined from Poland by Dr. Kamila Romanowska, a professor of EU law and security studies. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. Let me start by asking you now, military hubs across Ukraine sounds big. Are we talking training and logistics nodes, air defense support, or a tripwire deterrent presence?
First, it's very important to precise about where this idea comes from, because it's not a NATO initiative nor an EU agreed concept. It's a French-British political proposal driven primarily by Paris and London, and later premised coalition of willing. NATO and the EU are being consulted and looked in, but they are not originators and do not formally own the concept. The distinction matters because NATO deterrence doctrine and EU security governance are built on consensus, durability, and wide alliance-open ownership, alliance-wide open ownership, not a leadership-driven initiative. Now, substantively, what are these military hubs? It's an operational terms. They are not tip-wired forces and not front-line deterrence units. What is envisaged is a training, sustainment, and coordination hub, likely positioned far from the line of contact. Well, we know that the drones, so the line of contact might be unfortunately very, very far west of the Ukraine. They would serve three main purposes: force regeneration, training, rotation, rapid and reconstruction of Ukraine's unit, logistic and sustainment, storage, maintenance, spares, medical evacuation and transport, and protected environment. Some form of air defense and cartons, UAS protection around those sites. Otherwise, they will be, of course, military untangible. In deterrence terms, this deterrence by denial, not by the present. The idea is to make Ukraine structurally harder to coerce over the time, rather than to stop violation by proximity. Now, these are tricks and risks. First of all, the risk of mislabeling, calling it deterrence without enforcement, clarify risk, creating expectation it cannot meet. The second is targetability. Big hubs inside Ukraine become attractive targets unless they are heavily protected, dispersed, and politically defended. That immediately raises its escalation risk. And the third and most serious, the risk of divisions, because this is a Franco-British initiative, not an alliance-wide one, nor European, nor NATO. It risks a perception of core group deciding security architecture for everyone else. And from NATO perspective, especially in the eastern flank state, deterrence that is designed without those who carry the highest risk is fragile by definition.
So if the force is far from the front and not fighting, what is the actual deterrence mechanism that stops Russia from testing the ceasefire?
Well, let's again start with attribution. This concept is being advanced politically by France and the UK. The problem is here that NATO is not going to be guarantor, so it cannot be referenced. The distinction is critical when we talk about the credibility. Now, the deterrence mechanism, it's worth it all. It rests on process and not a posture. And we can hear some sort of posture, because we have here this deterrence by denial of the one theoretical pylon. The hubs aim to ensure that any Russian pressure does not degrade Ukraine long-term capacity. If every violation triggers more training, more air defense, more replenishment, strategic logic is of probing collapses. Deterrence by punishment. This is where the concept is currently the weakest. Deterrent only works if responses are automatic, de-authorized, and predictable. If Russia believes that breaches will not be debated, sanctions will not be negotiated, or will be negotiated, military assistance will be politically protected, this ceasefire is testing becomes what really states becomes the rational behavior. And the third one is deterrence by resilience. Because modern deterrence is not just tanks and troops, it's a drone defense, logistic security, cyber resilience, sabotage prevention, and narrative control. This is as well what we call a real deterrence by the hybrid threats and the conception of asymmetric control. This is where EU initiatives like the drone wall exist, Eastern Shield, and the hybrid threat resilience directly connect. A hub that cannot survive drone harassment, sabotage, or political pressure is not deterrent asset. It's actually a vulnerability. And the threat is simple. If deterrence relies on political will in the moment rather than pre-committed mechanisms, Russia will test it systematically.
Yes.
Systematically, because that's what they're doing.
Yes. So who decides a breach, and what is the enforcement ladder here? Attribution, remedies, snapback sanctions, or immediate military assistance?
Well, this is a very important question because it's the decisive one, and the one that currently lacks sufficient clarity for everyone. Because it's not a NATO mission. Article 5 logic does not apply. That means that enforcement must be explicitly designed, not assumed. But a credible system requires 3 layers. Attribution, then it will be US-enabled ISR, like drone, satellite sensor, that can provide fast, credible attribution. The closest ambiguity. But the attribution law, it's not deterrence. Then there has to be, of course, as you said, decision authority. There must be sustaining political security body empowered to classify violation and trigger response without propelling the strategic debate every time. Maybe this is exactly when Mr. Straumann and Macron wants to see it after the term is ended. Crucially, Eastern flank states must be inside this decision law, and it cannot be observers because they understand escalation dynamics, hybrid pressure, and enforcement credibility better than anyone else. They live daily. An enforcement ladder should therefore be pre-engaged. Snapback sanction, automatic military assistance packages, reinforcement of defensive posture, escalation control mechanism. The end. Here's what governance point is critical because Ukraine's structural challenges, corruption, procurement, capacity, wartime concentration of power. They are really mounting. They're existing before 2022 and before 2014, where Maidan happened. And they are now amplified by scale and urgency. This is not political criticism. This is a security reality. That's exactly why EU countries with lived reform experience must be involved in oversight. And I'm talking here about Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Romania, and Lithuania. States pass EU anti-corruption conditionality, restructure institution under pressure, and now confront arbitrage directly. And in my opinion, they bring credibility, not ideology as such. If oversight is narrow, trust erodes. If trust erodes, unity fractures, and
Yes.
deterrence corrupts. Simple as that.
Yes. Dr. Kamila, now Reuters reports that U.S.-led monitoring using drones, sensors, satellites. Is that enough without U.S. troops, or does deterrence still depend on political will?
Well, your question is extremely on time because monitoring is necessary, but is insufficient. Technology provides awareness. Deterrence requires certainty of response. And if NATO theory and doctrine, deterrence fails not when you don't see a violation, but when the adversary believe that you will hesitate, you will be fragmented, or you will negotiate your own red lines. US-led ISR can close the who did what gap, but without European political unity and automatic enforcement, technology becomes a camera without authority to make pictures. This is where the drone war logic matters again, because Europe is finally recognized that drone sensors, attribution, and rapid response are the part of continuous deterrence ecosystem. They are not isolated suits. And Ukraine's fire enforcement should be treated as an extension of European Eastern Flag Resilient architecture, not a standalone experiment. And US, who is already in the US troops are already replacement and are already in the Polish military base, they should be, in my opinion, and I hope so, maintain a part of this project.
Yes. What legal basis is most credible? Ukrainian invitation, coalition treaty, parliamentary votes, and how does that affect staying power through elections?
Well, it's a very big operational risk because, the problem is that there is a lot of political ambition outrunning security design now. It's not just about the hubs. It's not just about the hubs being target or hubs being a symbol. It's just about the faction that from the NATO and EU cohesion perspective, the safest and the most credible path will require the hubs on NATO territory first. Poland and Romania are prime nodes, Moldova only in resilience and border security roles, because this will protect soldiers, alliance, and political unity. And we talk here about political unity not only within Ukraine, which of course will need to, let's say, undergo the elections, but we talk here as well about a very important structural problems when it comes to the political theater in UK, in France. Both Macron and Keir Starmer most likely will lose those seats. Macron cannot be re-elected. Then we have as well mounting crisis within the European Union with various different sides. We lack as a Europe, let's say the one voice when it comes to the Ukraine and support for Ukraine. And unfortunately, this is something which is not taken care of properly by Mr. Zelensky. He just now standing all the time with those who were the last to support him. And now I mean Mr. Macron and Keir Starmer. While his first-hand supporters who sent straight away help as soon as we've learned that Ukraine has been aggressed, are being left aside. And unfortunately, this is something which is, let's say, quite peculiar for Zelensky, because he did, let's say, he hosted Trump when he was still in line, because he chose some part of the new friends and make others not willing as much to be the part of his closest team. This is really, really bad, because this will lead to the really fell when it's coming to the support, European one or NATO one, the support of the Ukraine portfolio and Ukraine support. And while these hubs are not a strategic, for strategic conclusion, it's not a bad idea, but it's dangerous, very dangerous one if it's done incorrectly, because it will frame as a Franco-British leadership project and will release outside Hungary, which is clearly against Ukraine, Italy, which is quite hesitant, Poland, who was really for the Ukraine and now is feeling like being a little bit slap on their back and so sorry, we are not letting you into the club for boys and girls. We risk division. If built without Eastern flank ownership, it loses credibility. If oversight is weak, it will collapse politically. Yes. And deterrence in 2026 is not about symbolism. It's about unity, resilience, enforcement, and trust.
Yes, from Poland, that was Dr. Kamila Romarowska, a professor of EU law and security studies. Thank you so much, Professor, for your insights and for joining us here on Q News. Moving on, the Egyptian Red Crescent says that it has sent its 111th air convoy into Gaza, carrying more than 6,160 tons of humanitarian assistance, including winter supplies, as conditions continue to deteriorate. The Red Crescent said that the convoy included food parcels and flour, medicines and medical supplies, fuel, personal care items, and winter relief, including clothing, blankets, and tents. It said that the organization remains Egypt's main coordinating body for humanitarian aid to Gaza, working with multiple partners and channels to deliver assistance and support emergency medical response. The convoy comes as humanitarian pressures deepen across the Palestinian territories, with UNRWA warning that thousands of Palestinian children remain displaced in the occupied West Bank, and as the Foreign Press Association criticized continued restrictions on foreign journalists' independent access to Gaza, saying that it limits verification and reporting even during a ceasefire. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Ibrahim al-Darawi, specialist in Israel-Palestinian affairs. Welcome, sir, to Q News. Sir, let me ask you, what is the single biggest winter killer in Gaza right now, besides the Israeli continuous aggression, exposure, respiratory illness, flooding, or even lack of fuel, and why?
Unfortunately, what's happening in the occupied Palestinian land is basically killing the Palestinians slowly. For the first time, they're using starvation and not allowing humanitarian aid. This is the first time that this is used in wars, and even the convoys. There is a real crisis here between Israel and the whole Gaza Strip. Here, if we are talking about Hamas's relationship with the Israelis, it is not it is not fair for the Palestinians, children and women to be treated this way. They are starving. They are witnessing extreme cold, rain, and so this is basically just torturing the Palestinians. And so is Israel actually following or complying to international law? Of course no, especially after what happened in Venezuela and what the US president has done. This shows that we are just living by the law of but actually over the past 2 years and what's been happening in the Gaza Strip, it is a humanitarian crisis, and it is actually it has to do with the US and with the European countries. Here, lots of countries are actually empathizing with the Gazans, and we've seen the United Nations talking about what happened in the West Bank, and about the settlements. And so here we're talking about a real crisis that the Strip has been witnessing, and we need a quick international intervention to save the Palestinians that are still left. They either have mental problems, physical problems, or they are starving. They even have chronic illnesses, and so the people there just have been experiencing and dealing with lots of illnesses. They have been through so much mental instability. Children and the elderly especially are really affected by this. And so yeah, the whole world needs to intervene to implement what was agreed upon in the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, and stopping this living through law of the jungle thing. And we've seen what happened between Netanyahu and Trump in the US, and we need the Rafah crossing to be opened on the 15th. We need peacekeeping forces and a technocratic government that Egypt is actually forming as we speak. And also there are Palestinian factions that are coming to Cairo next week, and also the and also the head of Palestinian intelligence were here, and they agreed on opening the Rafah crossing. And so we want to just go back to 20, and then we'll be having the United Nations, and we will have Magid of he will be here to ensure the safe exit of the Palestinians. But still Israel up till now is using the pretext of the remains of the last Israeli detainee. They've been looking for him everywhere, and they couldn't locate him, and so this is the justification that they are using. And so who's responsible now for what's happening in the Gaza Strip right now? We're talking about the destructed homes, tents, and the US has actually allowed some humanitarian aid and some kind of alternative homes for the Palestinians to
So, if you allow me to ask you this, and I would love a brief answer due to time shortage. Netanyahu said that law and order will be restored by expanding settlements. How do you read using such statement and using settlement expansion, widely criticized under international law as a domestic security policy tool?
In my opinion, I think that what happened today, when he said or talked about expanding settlements, I think that this is a clear message for what happened about the UN report, that what's happening in the West Bank and the occupied Palestinian government is a clear violation of the humanitarian law and international law. And so this is how Netanyahu has responded. And so here what's really important is that, or what this really shows, is that that Israel doesn't really care about the international law or humanitarian law. And so and long as the US is using the veto, then we won't be able to do that. Or Netanyahu, the only thing that could have stopped them temporarily from the Europeans is that they have said they'll be imposing actual sanctions on Netanyahu and Israel and the far right ministers. And so here we're talking about an actual crisis. Yeah, Netanyahu cannot go to lots of countries, especially those countries that have agreements with the. But this is not the only deterrent here. We need the U.S. to have some kind of to stop what's been happening with the Palestinians. We're talking about here we have around 67,000 Palestinians, and around we have 150,000 Palestinians who are killed, injured, or even missing. And so what Netanyahu has been doing with expanding the settlements, arming the settlers, allowing Smotrich and Ben Gvir to say all the statements that they've been saying, expanding settlements in the West Bank, as I said. We need an actual resolution here, and we need things to stop them. We've seen the Israeli officials, saying that they may have early elections, and so they wanna have the Israelis on their side. But this is what the Palestinians has been suffering from.
Yes.
And so the international law needs, the international community needs to intervene, and the U.S. just has to make sure that they don't lose control over Israel, because so far it looks like Israel itself is losing control of what they've been
Yes. Well,
doing.
thank you for
And
explaining your point, sir. From Cairo, that was Mr. Ibrahim Adrawi, specialist in Israeli-Palestinian affairs. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights and for joining us here on Q News. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we saw two very different fronts, but the same underlying contest. How power is organized after shock. In Ukraine, allies are trying to make any ceasefire enforceable with European presence and US-backed monitoring meant to deter a return to war. In Gaza, aid convoys and winter relief are racing against a deeper humanitarian strain, while policies on the ground, from access to reporting to settlement expansion, continue to shape what life looks like for civilians day to day. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching. Have a very good night.